Hello again, everyone, and I am back with our part 3 of 7.6, PSO 7A3. And this one, we're going to talk about government initiatives that impact things. So, government policies and initiatives at all scales, global, regional, national, subnational, or local, impact economic development. This could include things like taxes on corporations, sales taxes, regulations on the size of buildings and what kind of businesses can be in different places. And that can happen on a smaller level, but nationally and wider, we want to focus on a couple of different things. So the first would be tariffs. And we mentioned this earlier that a tariff is an imported tax on imported goods and services. And they can be used as a negotiating tool with other countries in order to get a more favorable agreement. They often target specific countries or exports. So when another country reacts with a tariff of their own, it can turn into what's called a tariff war, which ends up slowing trade and making economic growth slower in both countries. If it's targeting specific industries and their products, it can impact the economic development in specific parts of a country. So, for example, let's say that we want to protect American timber manufacturing and milling. So we might put a tariff on Canadian timber, and then that would help to protect our system. But then in exchange, Canada might decide to put a tariff on some of the things that we want to import to them or export to them. And that leads to, some problems in both economies. Now, another thing that can happen is what's called a trade embargo. So a trade embargo is an official ban on trade with a specific country or a specific good or product. So you guys might be familiar with, for example, the Cuban embargo, where the United States has put an embargo on Cuba back in the 60s. It was sort of lifted under Obama, but I don't even have the slightest idea of where we're at right now, honestly, with Cuba. But basically, it prevented all imports from Cuba to get to the United States through that embargo. But sometimes it can be happening, because of political tension like it did with Cuba, or it can be part of economic sanctions against a country. So we might decide we want to punish a country economically by putting a trade embargo in place where we don't allow, for example, Iran to import things to our country and we don't export to them. This can impact development in both countries by preventing exports and imports while potentially pushing trade into new areas or new agreements. It can also cause allies to side with countries involved and expand the embargo, which can cause a lot of problems for countries that maybe don't have a lot of allies. When it's against a specific kind of good, it might be related to agricultural protection, like preventing invasive species or plant diseases from spreading. Or it might be for either perceived or real health and safety reasons, like preventing raw milk imports from Europe, for example. Another thing that we see are alliances and agreements, and these can happen regionally at both the global and national level. So the United States, the states in the United States have trade delegates to get other countries to buy goods that are produced in their area, but we also have global alliances and agreements that happen between countries or between trading blocs. Trade agreements and alliances between countries and trade blocs like the EU are also things that we see here. And we also see, like, for example, here, that this is a free trade pact between the United States and the EU. I mean, obviously, political cartoon. You've got people, one of those is Obama, and I'm not sure who the other one's supposed to be because this was from, back in like 2010 or so. But it's basically the idea of like, let's make a free trade pact between the EU and the United States and get through this trade barrier. Because basically, prior to a free trade agreement between the two countries, well, EU and the United States, the EU's imports were really expensive because of tariffs and because of other like trade barriers. And so this is an attempt to get around that. Now, the impact on economic development is that some regions within a country might be more or less economically developed because of national or supranational policies and actions. Countries as a whole can be impacted by these kinds of government actions because trade is either happening or it's not happening. And this could be beneficial or non-beneficial trade. So like there are a lot of different things that could be happening, but it does have an impact on how well a country develops and how wealthy they are because of the limits on trade or the permissions that are granted with trade because of a government. All right, that's going to take us to our last EK. I'll be back with you shortly.